picture this. It's finals week, and you have your last test the following day. It is your hardest test, and your previous exams have beaten you down one by one. You haven't had a chance to study, and you just know you aren't prepared enough to actually pass this test and save your GPA. So you get out your textbook, you're exhausted, you take it to your desk, and you open it up. And you try to read it, but you can't read it because you're just trying not to fall asleep at this point. But what if I told you those are something that could help you out with your situation? Those are something that would increase your alertness, increase your concentration, and give you a ton of energy in just a couple minutes. And yes, this something does exist. It's not fake, it's not mythical, and it's not just made up, it's not falsely advertised. And what if I told you that this something was also given by doctors to students just like you? Now this something can save your GPA, and if you take it, it will save your GPA without a doubt. But that's only if you're willing to accept the risk that it might have on your life. It might actually turn your life into a disaster. Now this something is Adderall. And today I'm here to inform you about the pros and the cons of Adderall being on college campuses. Now I have done extensive research gathering information, statistics, and examples from credible websites such as university and government sites, as well as testimonies from experts on the subject. And all of this research has culminated into what has become positives that would include the medical uses of Adderall, as well as its effectiveness as a drug, and its negatives, which would be the high potential for addiction, as well as the illegal distribution that Adderall is a part of on college campuses. So, Adderall. When I say the name Adderall, not everybody gets the best feeling about it, and that's because Adderall does have a negative connotation due to its reputation on campuses. But what if I told you that Adderall actually did have a good, proper usage in the medical field? That's right, Adderall is actually used by doctors to treat serious ailments such as ADHD and narcolepsy. Now, how does Adderall do this? Well, to understand how Adderall is used to treat ADHD, one must know how ADHD comes about in the first place. So, in a 2009 study done by Dr. Nora D. Vocal, she discovered that ADHD is caused by dopamine not being received in the receptors in your brain. Now, what does this mean? Dopamine is a stimulant neurotransmitter. So if your brain is not receiving adequate amounts of dopamine, your brain is not being adequately stimulated. The result of this is ADHD, a state where your brain is constantly searching for stimulation but is not receiving it. So how does Adderall combat this? The Cleveland Clinic, in its ADHD stimulant therapy procedure details webpage, explains that Adderall combats ADHD by increasing the amount of dopamine in the system and then promoting binding to the receptor on the brain. So that's how it treats ADHD, but how does it treat narcolepsy? Well, it treats narcolepsy in exactly the same way, but it was discovered by the Harvard School of Medicine, the sleeping division, that it actually also increases chemicals such as serotonin and norepinephrine, that induce wakefulness of the user. So when looking at these two treatments, it is found that the common theme is just increased levels of dopamine. So if that's all that it does, if that's all it takes to treat ADHD and narcolepsy, why use Adderall of any other drug? And that's because Adderall is very effective. It's very good at what it does. As a matter of fact, it's so effective that it also provides bonus, per se, symptoms that are actually viewed as positive. These symptoms can be seen on the National Institute of Drug Abuse website, ironically, and these symptoms would include increased alertness, increased focus, and clearance of breathing passages. Now, what do these symptoms all have in common? What they have in common is that all of these symptoms make it very easy to promote what would some call healthy study habits. Basically, if you can stay awake, you can read, and if you can understand what you're reading, you're understanding it as like overall, proper studying. Because of this, however, Adderall does make its way out of its prescribed owner's hands and into the hands of other students. As a matter of fact, the Partnership for a Drugs-Free Kids did a survey in 2014 that found that 20% of college students have abused stimulants at least once in their life, with 60% of these students responding that Adderall was the stimulant abused. But that doesn't explain why Adderall. Yes, it is effective, but even with those symptoms added on, those are not symptoms exclusive to Adderall. As a matter of fact, caffeine can give you the same effect. So again, why Adderall? Adderall is very potent and is extremely long-lasting when compared to other drugs. The long-lasting effect is seen in the FDA's Guide to Medication for Adderall, which was released in 2007, and it states that Adderall has a half-life of 10 hours on the average adult. What does this mean? Basically, when a drug has a half-life, especially Adderall, once it reaches its half-life point, half of the medication has already been used, but that is also the peak of when it is in your system. Once a drug reaches its half-life, it slowly decreases exponentially, thus staying in your body for an extended period of time. Now, as for the potency, when compared to another stimulant, Ritalin, a 1999 research project done by the State University of New York found that Adderall is actually 2 to 3 times more potent than Ritalin. This was discovered when they wanted to do a behavioral equivalence test between the two drugs, and they found that 7.5 milligrams of Adderall is equivalent to 17.5 milligrams of Ritalin when looking at how it affected the patients. So if I'm talking to you about a drug that does only good things and is very good at doing those good things, how could there be any negative associated with it? Well, this brings me to my next point, the first negative, which is that Adderall, because of this and in addition to other factors, is very highly addictive as well as dangerous. Now, of course, that just seems like common sense. If I'm going to tell you about a drug that does nothing but good things and it's good at what it does, of course it's going to be addictive by choice. However, the real reason that it is addictive is due to a much deeper reason. And this reason is described by Dr. Ryan Davidson, a neuroscientist, that explains that the reason Adderall is so highly addictive is due to its active ingredient on the chemical level, amphetamine. Now, amphetamine might sound familiar, and that is because it is closely related to its cousin methamphetamine. How closely related? On the chemical level, amphetamine is only one small compound away from becoming methamphetamine. This small compound is called a methyl group. Then basically, the absence of the methyl group calls for the name amphetamine, whereas methamphetamine is called that because it has the methyl group. To explain its relation in a different form, however, the DEA drug scheduling classifications has placed amphetamines and methamphetamines in the same classification of Schedule II drugs. What does this mean? Basically, Schedule II drugs are classified as such because they have a very high level of potential for addiction as well as a high potential for psychological and physiological dependence if taken in excess amounts. But it appears we just made a full circle because, again, I've told you about a good drug and all I've said about it that appears to be negative is that it's addictive. How can being addicted to something good be bad? Well, that is because when you're addicted to Adderall and you begin taking it in excess amounts, negative things start happening. Negative symptoms do arise. And these symptoms can be found on the University of Texas Healthy Horns webpage. These symptoms include symptoms as serious as irregular heartbeat, paranoia, and insomnia. That is not as bad as it gets, however, as the Poison Help website also provides more severe symptoms such as seizures, liver toxicity, cardiovascular disease, and even death. Dangerous symptoms and possible death, as well as addiction, is not as far as it goes, however. For another con that I'm going to be talking about is how Adderall is involved in illegal distribution on campuses. Basically, Adderall is a prescribed medication, so how do people get a hold of it if they don't have a prescription? Well, according to a study done by Recovery Brands in 2016 entitled Acquiring Prescription Stimulants, 63% of college students received their Adderall from their friends, with the remaining percentages receiving the drug from drug dealers, classmates, and even family members. Now, if they were to be caught doing this in Texas, they will be facing some very steep legal action. Southwestern SMU has provided a webpage entitled The Texas State Law and Penalties for Controlled Substances, and on this webpage entails what happens if you are caught selling controlled substances or just being in possession without a prescription. Basically, if you are caught selling controlled substances, such as Adderall, you may be confined for no less than 180 days and fined a bill of not to exceed $10,000. Whereas if you're only just holding Adderall without a prescription, just in possession of it, you can be confined for no more than 180 days and be fined a fine no more than $2,000. That's not all, however, as both of these situations can also incur felony. And getting a felony is not something you want on your personal record. There's no way to get around the felony if you're caught with drugs or selling drugs. The only thing that changes in that situation is how much of the controlled substance you have, or that you intend to sell, and all that does is increase the degree of the felony of which you will incur. Also, building upon the illegal distribution point, however, is something else that is also a lot more serious than just being caught with illegal substances. Now, there are students that do participate in buying Adderall and they do get away with it. They take the pill, they save their grade, they think everything's fine. But that is not always what can happen. Basically, this is because when you buy drugs illegally, you are not buying drugs that are properly dosed to your body, and you're not even sure of the drugs that you are buying. What does this mean? I'd like to remind you of the severe symptoms that I talked about when I visited poisonhope.com. These symptoms included seizures, liver toxicity, cardiovascular disease, and death. Why am I bringing this back up? Because when I found these symptoms, all I had to do was look up what would happen if I was poisoned by 10 milligrams of Adderall. For those of you that don't know, 10 milligrams of Adderall is the second lowest dosage that is prescribed to people who need it. It might seem like a bit of a reach, but if you are not sure of how Adderall is going to react in your body, 10 milligrams can very well hospitalize you, if not kill you. That's not the worst of what can happen, however, as again, you're not buying drugs with name labels. You cannot trust who you're buying the drugs from. So what if you're not buying Adderall at all? What do I mean by this? Although it is a dangerous example, a more comical example would be if you were trying to buy Adderall and instead you bought Viagra. At that point, only one party is going to be alert and ready to work. However, a more serious example is if you were to try to buy Adderall XR, which is basically just a longer releasing drug. It just takes longer to go into your body, and it looks differently. It's a little orange pill instead of blue one. If you were to try to buy Adderall XR and you ended up buying Coumadin, that would be a very bad situation to be in. Now, you may not know what Coumadin is because Coumadin is just a brand name for the drug that I'm talking about, but the generic name for this drug is warfarin. Now, a lot more of you may recognize warfarin because it is a very, very dangerous blood thinner. As a matter of fact, according to the FDA Coumadin medication guide, warfarin needs to be dosed to the specific person because if it is not dosed correctly, it can lead to extreme bleeding, as well as tissue necrosis and hives, as well as it can put you in the hospital very easily. So, when you really look at all the information that I've gathered and presented, you really start to see that Adderall really is a high-risk, high-reward kind of drug. Either way, by informing you of both sides of this drug, from its medical uses to its effectiveness as a study drug, all the way to its high risk of addiction and its illegal distribution factor, I hope you have just been informed about the pros and cons about Adderall and its presence on college campuses. And at this moment, I'd like to take you back to the introduction to how we started this off. Studying for an exam, hardest exam, this is your make or break for your GPA. Is this miracle drug really worth the risk of lifelong disaster? Thank you.